Hi everyone, my name's Emma. Today we're talking about Blockbuster, Netflix, essentialism. Seems pretty much out there, but we're going to connect all of these together and really see what lessons we can learn from all three of these very important pieces of the history that we have seen in the past 20 years. When it comes to choices and decisions, the ones that we make with more intention will help us create a world that we want to live in. And we can look at the world with all the lessons that are available and see what we can do and apply in our own lives to create the world and life that we want. And when it comes to what happened with a Blockbuster and Netflix, we have a previous video where we talked about how Netflix really wanted Blockbuster to buy them and for them to be their online presence. And after many months, Blockbuster finally gave them the ability to come in for a meeting and basically laughed them out of the room because they didn't need Netflix, and so they thought. Now, Blockbuster has had over 9,000 stores across the world, and when the 2008 recession hit, they went bankrupt. And because of that, over the next 10 years, pretty much every store was shut down, except for one in Bend, Oregon, which is considered the last Blockbuster. And this video really is coming out of me watching the documentary called The Last Blockbuster, which is on Netflix. And the entire documentary is basically focused on the downfall of Blockbuster and how there came to be just one Blockbuster when there was over 9,000 stores. And to talk about their downfall, they talked about the rise of Blockbuster and how that started. And I'll get into that a little bit. When movies used to come out, you used to only be able to watch them in theaters because buying a DVD copy of it, or they didn't have DVDs back then, but a VCR tape copy of it cost hundreds of dollars, and nobody wanted to do that. So when Blockbuster began, it bought a bunch of these movies and then allowed people to rent it. And then they actually had to go to the Supreme Court because the movie industry was very upset that Blockbuster was making money off of their movies in that way. And then the Supreme Court sided with Blockbuster and allowed them to continue to rent these movies. And then Blockbuster at some point made a deal with the movie industry that if they get access to more videotapes, that the movie industry can get a cut from every time there is a rental. So in that way, everybody got a bit of the puzzle, a bit of the cake. Everybody got to enjoy the movies and people got paid in between. But then this was all around the 1980s and that went up to the 2000s. And 2000 was really a time where Blockbuster was continuing to go up, but had begun to see that there was issues in the financial management of Blockbuster. And because of that, we're getting into essentialism soon, but there seemed to be people being pulled in so many different directions. Blockbuster was trying to do quick things to make sure that they could continue to have sales. And because of that, they started to do a straddling strategy where Netflix only had DVD rentals where they would send it to you by mail, and where they were beginning to shift to their online streaming site. And Blockbuster was doing that as well. They had CDs that they could mail out to you. They were trying to start their own streaming. But they still had the 9,000 stores in operation. They decided to do both things instead of focusing on one. And this comes into this idea of essentialism, where many of us think so many things are essential, we need to do everything, but true essentialists understand that most things are non-essential. And the straddling strategy is something that very rarely will ever work, and that there's really no solutions to anything, but rather always trade-offs. And this happened with Southwest Airlines. When Southwest began becoming an airline, they cut out pretty much all the fancy stuff, and everybody had to get a coach ticket. You got to choose your seats as soon as you got on board. You didn't pick them before, you didn't get a meal, and there was only certain places that the flights would go. But because of that, they were super cheap, there was a quick turnaround, and there was always flights available. And they were completely different than absolutely anybody in the industry. And because of that, Southwest would have been an amazing investment, back in the 2000s. And then another airline company, Continental Airlines, tried to do the same thing where they imported what Southwest was doing onto some of their airlines, but a majority of their business continued in the same fashion, which is exactly what Blockbuster did. They still had their 9,000 stores and were trying to import what Netflix was doing. But because Netflix was able to completely dedicate all of its resources and all of its funding into creating the mailing of the DVDs, but also create their streaming site, they were able to do what nobody else could do because they bet completely that this was the right idea and that they were going to pursue it. And that is the reason why both of these companies, Blockbuster, Continental Airlines, did not continue to work, because they were beaten out by somebody who went full force into the idea that they understood was going to be the one that wins. Because of that, we end up in this situation where Blockbuster claims that it wasn't because they passed up on Netflix, but because they went bankrupt. And I think that that is true, but also by them passing up on Netflix was one of the first indications of the mistakes that was going on in the financial management of the company. And that alone is proof that the next steps were not going to be truly as successful. They were quick turnarounds. How can we make the most profit right now, and not projecting into the future and understanding that the decisions and choices we make now are just going to be compounding as we go through the future. And so what can we learn from what Blockbuster did, what Continental did, through this idea of essentialism and really figuring out what is essential? And essentialism is the disciplined pursuit of doing less but better. Many of us try to do many things every single day. We're constantly pulled into meetings, constantly having to text hundreds of people, keeping up conversations with everyone, scrolling through TikTok and Instagram, and really trying so hard to do everything at once. And then we end up realizing that we can't get anything done, and we don't end up getting much done. By the end of the day, we realize we have a longer to-do list and nothing was actually crossed off that we started to want to do at the start of the day. So it creates this running loop, and we put a little effort in a million different directions and we don't move in any of them. But if we were to step back, focus, and direct our energy into one specific direction with one specific purpose, we could really understand how everything else falls into place with that. And if we consistently look at, why am I doing this? What am I trading doing this instead of something else? And looking at all the options as often as we can and constantly analyzing and refiguring out, what can we do? So how do we do that? Well, we'll talk about that in another video, but that is the first step, is how do we even realize that this is going on? How do we start looking at the world and being like, how am I supposed to understand what is happening if I'm constantly being pulled in a million different directions? And you can't look forward and backward at the same time and expect to move in any direction. And that's often what we're doing. We're anxious about the future. We're worried about what has been said. We're disappointed by our past. We're thinking about the future. This person wants our attention. We get pulled into a meeting, and there's this constant pull from every direction. But if we were to stop to reorient our lives to understand our choices are our own, and that every single one has a consequence that we need to deal with and need to understand, hey, what is happening? What is going on? What can I do next? What can't I do anymore? Because this isn't productive anymore. We all have a purpose in our lives, and I think a lot of the time society has created so many distractions, so many abilities to make various choices, that we're so overwhelmed by decision fatigue that we can't even tune into what we actually want to do, because we have way too many options and we don't know how to pursue any of them without doing all of them and not liking any of them. So it's this real counterintuitive approach that many of us have to life, where we just do it all and don't actually like any of it because we don't spend enough time doing any of it. So how do we counterbalance that? Well, we're going to get into that a little bit more as we continue to read Essentialism But I hope you got something out of today's video where you can really take a step back and look at your life and the lessons that exist all around us. You may have enjoyed going to Blockbuster when you were a kid and now you watch Netflix, but both of those may have been big parts of your lives and still are, and there's so many lessons to be learned. And that can be said for almost anything else that we've enjoyed in our lives and continue to enjoy. I hope to see you soon, but until then, I hope that you have an amazing day.